So I wanted to set this video up real quick. What the goal of this project here is to take the OEM calipers and then compare them to what we call an OEM Plus upgrade. The Acura Legend calipers have been used widely in single piston caliper setups such as the Acura CL to provide a greater braking force and greater duration of braking losing that without losing the feel of the brakes. What we're going to do here is part one, refurbish these, and then part two, in the summertime, we're going to do a comparative review of the OEM single piston calipers to the Acura Legend dual piston calipers. And what the hope is that we're going to really answer the question, does the dual piston caliper Legend upgrade provide a OEM Plus performance upgrade without breaking the bank compared to doing something like a Acura TL Type-S Brembo upgrade, or maybe even something in the aftermarket world. So what you're seeing here is me refurbishing these calipers, which will then later go on the CL once we do a baseline with the original calipers.
So one of the mild upgrades that you can do to your car, or your Acura or your Honda, depending on what year, is to convert to a Legend dual piston caliper setup, where each piston has two, or each caliper has two pistons in it. If I remember correctly, this is a 43 millimeter and a 38 millimeter piston in each caliper. Now, the Legend calipers are pretty hard to come by nowadays. They're pretty sought after for a lot of the early 90s to early 2000 Acura and Hondas, because it's recognized that the two-piston brake setup allows you to run larger pads and disperses even pressure over those pads as opposed to a one piston. If you do the math, actually the one piston comes out a little bit further ahead on the surface area pressure, but the two piston gives you equal over the pad surface area as opposed to just centralized, and that's kind of why the preference is for the Legend caliper. Well, one of the important points to make about the Legend caliper is that it's almost 30 years old at this point, and so finding them is pretty hard to come by. If you look at Rock Auto, for example, or your local auto parts distributor, you can only find the right caliper nowadays, and the left one is very hard to come by. So you can see here that I have two rights, and most people would probably question, why do you have two rights since you're going to need a left and a right? Well, what I was able to do is find a caliper from my local auto salvage yard. So this is a left caliper for an Acura Legend with the corresponding bracket. The problem is that the pistons have some pitting and some rusting occurring here, so no longer are these really usable at this point. We want to take the shell of this and basically convert everything over from one of these known good right calipers, and take the piston and the seals out and move them over to the left, and then we'll send the right one back to get our core with the old hardware and pistons. Now, each of them come with a new hardware kit, which I will hold on to because this alone is pretty valuable. So these two calipers by themselves are about $80, and you get a $40 core on them. So both of these are going to be about $40 cost to me each. And then the two from the salvage yard that I picked up, both a left and a right, is going to be right in the $100. So all in said and done, I'll probably break out about $100 total spent on these calipers here to give you a pretty mild upgrade. Now, I will say that we. Now I will say that looking at the left caliper here, you can see I've done a bunch of work to kind of refurbish this caliper so that it can receive paint. If you were to look at the other one here, this is the true right side from the salvage yard. This was from a Northeast salvage yard, and subsequently you get a lot of rusting, which I've talked about numerous times in my videos. Now these are the refurbished right ones, so this right one will actually go back as a core, and we'll hold on to one of these right ones, and then the other right one here will end up being the sacrificial caliper so that we can rebuild this left one. And here's the hardware that comes with both. So we actually break out pretty far ahead as far as rebuilding these go, because if I was to purchase this alone, we're looking at probably about $20, and then this caliper right here, like I said, was about $40. So, you know, to buy a new caliper and refurbish it all piece by piece would be far more expensive. So this kit is actually pretty economical. Do I recommend buying two rights and doing this yourself? Probably not the best idea, but if you're looking for the Legend caliper and you recognize that you can't find a left anymore, but you can find a left in your salvage yard, then this might be a feasible option for you. And then to match the calipers on the CL in the rear, these will be the new front ones. Obviously, we'll paint them with this product, which is what I painted the back of them with. So one of the questions is, you're probably wondering, how was I able to do this? A combination of a paint scouring pad, because actually the preferred option here to do what I have done so far is to use a media blasting cabinet and media blast all of the rust off of here, giving you with a pretty clean surface, which is probably what they did here to get this as nice as they did. I, on the other hand, don't have that and don't really feel like spending that money, so combination of these different drills, this to get into the hard spot, and a Dremel tool to help clean out some of these orifices here, because each of these have a pretty tight lip right here, which is where the seal inserts into. You want to clean that up either with a Dremel tool and a combination of like a brass brush. Don't use steel on the inside of this because it'll mar the inside. You want to use a brass brush to get on the inside of this, because you want, I mean, you could do whatever you want to the casting here, but when it comes to the inside of where the pistons go, you definitely don't want to damage that. So you would use brass. Okay, so we got the two seals in here. One went in a little crooked and curled up on me, so had to go back and take that one out. So we have both the seals in, and now we're putting in the dust seal. So both inner seals are now in, and now we're going for the outer dust seal. Now the outer dust seal is a little tricky sometimes because it is a very small lip in which you're inserting this into. So it may take a couple shots to get this in. The important thing here, though, is to not rip the seal, as you can imagine. When they're new, they're a little bit more difficult to rip, but when they're old, they just want to rip all the time. And matter of fact, when I took out the old one here, it was rusted so bad that it was just basically ripping as I was trying to get it out, and there was just nothing I could do about it. And I can tell that this one is not want to play a game with me on the.
So what I ended up realizing here was that my approach was what was wrong. The reason why it's not going to work with this approach is that once you try to put the piston into the seal, the dust boot just wants to get dragged in with it, even with the lubricant. So what you actually have to do here is you have to slip on the dust boot to the piston. So the starting point to this process should be insert the inner seal, then slide the dust boot over the piston while it's outside of the caliper, and drag the boot all the way to the bottom so that it's just literally the lip lining up with the ring within the caliper. Once you get the ring seated within the caliper, then the piston won't drag the boot in, and likewise you'll have a much easier assembly. My error here was that I thought you had to put the dust boot in first, which was incorrect, and then that ends up just ripping the boot and making it completely useless. So I ended up having to repurchase, and which you'll see in the next segment here. I ended up buying centric seals and redoing the whole process.
Okay, so we have the two calipers painted here. You can see that there are new pistons and seals. There is a little trick to get the seals in place. What you have to do is take the seal, put the piston in, and basically put the seal all the way on the bottom of the piston, and then insert it into the caliper, and then push the piston in. If you try to push this in and then the piston, it'll likely rip, which is what my experience was. And then if you try to put the piston and then the seal in at the same time without having it all the way to the bottom, what ends up happening is that the piston won't allow the seal to actually sit into the groove. There's actually a channel in which this seal sits in, allowing you to put the piston seal in and have it retain as the piston works in and out as the operation of the brakes. So here is the part number. Part number for the Acura Legend dual piston seal comes with the 2 inner seals and 2 dust boots, which will do 1 piston or 1 caliper. So you want to order 2 of these if you're doing both the left and the right. And Centric was the only company that I could find that would supply these for the Acura Legend calipers. And depending on where you look, they're a little bit pricier. These were obtained through Rock Auto and were about $5.50, but I saw them on eBay going for as high as about $17 to $20 a piece. So what we did here was did a Pour 15 by Eastwood top coat, direct to metal, rust inhibiting paint. Gives it a nice gloss shine, which is what I was intending for. Pretty simple product to apply. Use a foam brush. Initially you could use, for the first coat you could use a typical brush, but for the last coat you always want to use a foam one, which will give you that nice gloss finish without any brush strokes in it. So that is pretty easy to use. I use a 1-inch tip on this because it allows me to get into the crevices and the retaining ring area at the top there where there's 2 little slits. This is still drying, so I'll take you on a little bit of a tour of it. As you can see here, we have the 2 pistons inserted with new dust seals, new paint on there, and on the back side, this is why I use a 1-inch. A 1-inch allows me to get into these areas. So you'll probably pick up on a subtle difference between these two. If you look at it like this, you can see that this one has a definite smooth texture on the top as opposed to this one, which has a little bit of a coarser finish. This is because this is the left side caliper that we got from the junkyard, which had a lot of rust on it, in which we took a carbide wheel and took all that rust off, but what it leaves you with is a really fine finish, as opposed to this one. This one was a remanufactured one with a silver powder coating, and we just roughed it up and then put the pour paint on, which gives you a little bit of a texture difference between the two. And you can see that right here as well. It's a little bit more gravelly looking, and then this is a little bit more smooth looking. Probably won't be that noticeable while it's on the car, but this is kind of the finished product, if you were.